I got to be there.
Yes. All right. Let me turn on the recorder here, and we will begin in a second. Okay. Let's begin. Okay. Tonight's class is a very special topic, a topic that is long overdue. And there was other times when we visited a topic in different ways, in different avenues. And this is the topic of rebuking, how to give appropriate rebuke and criticism. In other words, how do we get into someone else's space without fighting? How do we get to someone else's space and really touching on someone else's issues, criticizing without hurting, rebuking someone without leaving wreckage behind us as a result of that criticism? Now, this is a very important topic because we have an obligation to criticize. We have an obligation to grow one another. We have an obligation as Jewish people, that's actually a biblical obligation. It's a mitzvah. And that mitzvah is in the Torah. It's not just some type of a good suggestion to rebuke someone else. In the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, the Torah tells us, and it's all written in the same verse, you should not hate your fellow brother in your heart. Rebuke, you shall rebuke your fellow friend, and you shall not cause him to bear him to sin. And it's pretty clear that we have an obligation, not just when we see someone about to do some type of a sin against God, we have an obligation to open up our mouth and say something. We actually have an obligation also when someone did to us something wrong. Maimonides, who quotes the law, writes in very great detail how deep the obligation goes, that we're not allowed to hold the grudge in our stomach. We have to open up and we have to say what's on our mind and make sure the other person knows what we are feeling, what we experienced, express the hurt, express the anguish. This is an obligation. Now, if this was said, 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, when people were much more reserved and less talkative, how much more so this obligation in our generation, where everyone is in the place of feelings, everybody's attuned to what's going on around him, how much more so we have to express grudges, express hurt, and tell the other person when he's making us uncomfortable or he's doing things against us. So in tonight's class, I'm going to actually go into great depth in length and in width and actually get to practical advice. I love practical advice. We could talk esoterics all day long, but there's nothing more great than actually getting practical about what's the key to administrate criticism in a way that it leaves, not just it doesn't leave pain or wreckage, it actually brings us together in deeper relationships, and it creates and it cements our love, and it actually becomes one of the ways of growing one another. Okay. Now, we all know that the key for a good marriage is to come to an agreement that each one of us agrees that we don't understand the other side. God Almighty put us in a world that we are very different from one another, not just men and men and women, even men from the same community, from the same religion, from the same background, from the same upbringing, even brothers and sisters, have some very, very deep differences between each other. And every time there is a couple coming for a conversation or a discussion or anytime I have to give a class with our married couples, I always ask, what do you want to talk about? And yes, everybody wants to talk about love. But when we want to talk about the real problems, the real issues, always the question comes up is how can we talk about things that we don't want to talk about and not get to a place of fighting and hurting? I mean, when we talk about things that we want to talk about, obviously everybody's happy. But there's a lot of things that living together with another human being that causes us that we have to talk about things that are unacceptable, not okay, things that we are expecting changing. How do we do that without hurting? How do we do that? Now, most of us, and I'll say most of us because I've been knowing I'm a little bit of a people's person. So I believe that most of us um, carry a lot of disappointment in the success of giving proper um, criticism to someone. We have tried. We have tried in our marriage. We have tried in our relationship with our children. We have tried with friends and family, people that we have known for the beginning of time. And some of us even we have tried with our parents, people that we know that will love us unconditionally. We tried. We tried saying some words of criticism. And I think most of us will say it never ended good. It always ended with a piece of me feeling less of, or the person who I criticized, they felt less of. It never ended good. Now, is there a possibility to even fulfill that mitzvah in a proper way? Now, this is not my question, even though I'm a therapist and a rabbi. That's not my question. This is a question that the Talmud is asking. The Talmud in the Tractate of Erchin, page 16b. I want to quote for you a quote from the Talmud. Talmud says as follows. How do we know that if you see in your friend something that's inappropriate, you have an obligation to reprove him and to rebuke him? Says the Talmud, because it says in the verse in Leviticus, Ocheach tochiach. Rebuke, you shall rebuke. Amar Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon, who is a sage of the Talmud, says, he said, I wonder, I'm just translating in English, literally translating. I wonder, do we have in this generation someone who can accept criticism? He's talking about something that in his generation, I'm talking about 2,000 years ago, the times of the Second Temple, Rabbi Tarfon lived. He says, I wonder if someone in my generation could even accept criticism. And he gives an example. He says, if I tell someone, take out a toothpick between your teeth, he responds to me, take out a beam of lumber between your eyes. Meaning to say, if I criticize someone on something tiny, something small that he did, right away, he will tell me about something big that I did. Meaning to say is no one can accept criticism in our generation. Now, this is the times of the Talmud. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was sitting at that discussion, and he said, to me, honey, I wonder, is there even a possibility in our generation someone who knows how to administrate criticism? Rabbi Tarfon was worried, is there anybody in our generation who's even accepting criticism? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I don't know if there's anybody who knows how to give criticism. Now, this is in the generation of the Talmud, where they are discussing that mitzvah, the mitzvah of criticizing, the mitzvah of rebuking and reproving one another. They're having a discussion where each one of them from each side says, one says, I don't know who is even accepting criticism, and the other one says, I don't know if anybody even knows how to give criticism. So being someone who criticizes, or being someone who's on the receiving end of the criticism, is something that's extremely, extremely hard. And really, there are three reasons why it's so hard to listen to criticism. And I'll share with you. I mean, this is what came through my thoughts. When someone criticizes you, what we hear when we are listening to words of criticism, we are being suddenly questioned about our personality. For example, when a spouse tells the other spouse about something small that he did, that he didn't do, what the spouse is hearing in the criticism, he's hearing the music. What does it say? Even though, let's say, she complains that no light bulbs was changed in the house, what does he hear in the criticism? He hears, you are a failure, you are a zero, I should have thought before I married you, I made a mistake. Now, what happens to a person when he hears that? When your very personality is being questioned and being doubted, the natural reaction is to protect myself. I'm not a failure. I'm not a zero. I am the right choice. So we have two options. Or we attack back. Who are you to tell me? You are not doing your job. So we attack back. Or we just go into silence. It's called fight or flight. We go into the state of silence and we don't respond. And the problem of that is that the rebuke causes us to feel that we are less of who we are. It's a question on our very personality. Point number two. When someone rebukes you, it's actually a demand to change. You're not doing what you're supposed to. You could do much better than that. Now, nobody likes to change. Nobody likes to change. One of the hardest things is to go out of our comfort zone and to do things differently. Now, even though you're listening to the criticism, but your inner being, who is very comfortable in the way you are, is dismissing the criticism because I don't want to change what I'm used to. Now, number three, and this is the hardest one, there's something very unfair about someone criticizing you. Who are you to criticize me? You knew who I am when you married me. Now you're getting all upset. Now, you married me because who I am. Yeah. People who are, they say that people separate for the same reasons they got married. Now, I like you because you were different. Now, I am very outgoing and you are a big introvert. This is the way I was attracted to you. You are a person who's very generous, and this is a person who very likes to accept other people's generosity. This opposites between people is what attracts them in the first place. And it's very funny is when it comes the moment when we get upset about the very things that attracted us about the other person. So now that you're criticizing me, it's totally unfair. The whole reason you married me is because I am that way. And now you're getting all upset about me. And this is basically the problem with criticizing is that the recipient already, before he even hears anything, his protectors get up and he doesn't want to listen. So here comes the question. And again, I'm just leading you into the discussion of this week's parsha. What's even the mitzvah of rebuking someone else? How is it even possible to rebuke someone else in a proper way? It's so hard. It's so ineffective. Is there a way of doing it in an effective way? Now, why am I bringing up this subject right now? It's a very good subject to bring up at any time. We are starting this week the book of Devorim. The book of Deuteronomy, it's called in English. I don't know what the word Deuteronomy means, but I know that in the book, the fifth book is called in English the book of Deuteronomy. Fancy word. Chumash Devorim is actually a book that's very different than the other five books. It's a book that Moshe is the one who talks. In the first four books, God is the one who's speaking. God is speaking to Moshe, God is speaking to Abraham. It's all about God speaking, and Moshe is just quoting what God told him. The fifth book begins with the words, Eila Devorim Ashadiba Moshe El Kol Yisrael. Moshe is the one who gives the speech to the Jewish people. It was not just one speech. It was actually a series of lectures that began on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, about a month and 2 weeks before Moshe's passing. Moshe began a series of lectures, and that series of lectures went on until Moshe's passing. Now, in the series of lectures, Moshe goes through a review of a lot of the mitzvahs, a lot of the commandments of the Jewish people in Israel, what they need to do and how they need to live their life, and so on and so forth. But the beginning of the book, the first three parshas of the book, Moshe is actually criticizing the Jewish people very harshly. He goes through with them every event that they did terrible things. And he goes into detail what they did, how they upsetted God, and what did God say, and everything. Even in greater detail, the way it was written in the original story when that happened. Like he goes through the whole sin of the golden calf again. He goes through the story of the spies. Very, very great detail, going through, criticizing about what happened, all the events that happened in the desert. Now, it's interesting. Until now, Moshe was the one who defends the Jewish people. Moshe is the one who cries out to God, and he demands from God to have compassion on the Jewish people, to look away from their mischief, look away from their misbehavior. Suddenly here, something changes. Suddenly Moshe becomes the criticizer. Moshe becomes the one who is letting the Jewish people know how upsetting is what they did. And the question is, why now? Why now? What happened till now? Why didn't you say it then when it happened? Why now, when you're going to pass away, now you're using the opportunity to start going through and giving them grief about what happened in the past 40 years? Now, the question is even bigger. This is the big question here. The people he's talking to are not the people who did those terrible things. The generation died in the desert. Anyone who was part of the golden calf, anybody who was part of the story of the spies, anybody who was part of any of those complaining and trouble, all these people died in the desert in the last 38 and a half years. None of them survived. He's talking to their kids. He's talking to their grandkids. Why is he rebuking them for things that they never did? Now, if you see the beginning, the first verse, Moshe talks in riddles. He doesn't go into the details. He talks in riddles. He says names of locations. And Rashi explains that each location actually refers to one of those incidents that happened. And Rashi says, Moshe is giving a lot of respect to the Jewish people. He doesn't go into details. He only speaks in riddles about what they did. Learn from that. When you criticize someone, you should only criticize them without going into on and on about the details. Just speak about the actual point, and that's it. A very good piece of advice for people who need to criticize someone is not to go into lengthy monologues about what happened, just to say the point, and that's it. And the question is, yes, that's the beginning. That's the first verse. But then we have three parshas Devorim, Veschanan, and Akev, where he goes into great detail. And he goes on and on and on about what they did and how they did it and what happened and what happened and what they did. So again, what's the questions here? Why now? Why are you criticizing the Jewish people now before you die? Where were you the last 40 years? Why didn't you do that to the people who actually did the sin? Number two is you are criticizing the wrong people. This is not the people who were part of the sin. Rashi says something very powerful. Now, this is Rashi's saying psychology. Rashi's not just saying, I mean, it's Torah, but it's so deeply, profoundly amazing, educational what Rashi says. I'm just going to tell you what Rashi says. I'm not going to go into a translation and quoting, but Rashi says as follows. Why did Moshe wait till now to criticize the Jewish people? And again, you're going to learn lessons about proper criticism throughout the class tonight. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu waiting till now? Says Rashi, Moshe Rabbeinu learned from his grandfather Yaakov that criticism should be given only before you die. Yaakov has a lot of criticism for his children. His children did some horrible things, Shimon and Levi and Yehuda and Reuven. There was a lot of sin that went on in the history of that family. And Yaakov criticizes him when he's laying on his deathbed. What was he waiting till then? Why was he waiting till they were on their deathbed? Says Rashi, Yaakov said, if I would have criticized you right when it happened, I was worried. What was Yaakov worried, criticizing his son? I was worried that you're going to leave me and join my brother Esav. Criticism is dangerous. When you criticize someone, the person, like we said, there are three things that happens when you criticize someone. It could be so hurtful, so misunderstood and unacceptable to the receiver that Reuven, Yaakov was worried that his Reuven will go and join the evil Esav. So I didn't criticize him. Can you imagine? Yaakov is not criticizing his son Reuven because of a very subtle fear. It is very real to him. If I criticize you, you might fall down the beaten track and join Esav. Wow. How much do we have to put our mind to when we are giving a difficult word of judgment or criticism to our children? How many people till today suffer that they tell their kids criticism from the purest place in their heart, and the kid walked out of the house and never came back because the criticism was too much, and he felt the lack of love or acceptance from his father because he was not living up to certain standards. Yaakov Avinu is worried about his son Reuven, that he might be criticized in such a way that he might leave him and go and join Esau. So he said, I waited till now that I'm going to die, now that I see you married with children and grandchildren, I waited till now to tell you, to do tshuva, to remind you about the act that you did and to criticize you for that. Another thing Rashi says, the reason why he waited till his death is because criticism should not be said more than once. You should never have to repeat yourself. Usually, when we are upset about something, we talk about it multiple times. Says Rashi, because he knew he's going to die, and he knew that he's not going to have to criticize him ever again, criticism should be given once. You should never have to repeat that word of criticism again, even if you don't see an effect in what you're doing. Yaakov waited till the last minute of his life to criticize him then. Then Rashi says something very powerful, number 3. Rashi says, if I would have criticized you when you were a child in my house, every time your eyes would meet my eyes, you would be embarrassed. Every time you would see me, it would remind you about that I was a failure, that I did something that's not okay. He says, now that I'm dying, you're never going to see me again. So therefore, I'm waiting with the criticism till now, so I don't have to see you ever again. You hear what I have to say, take it, leave it. You don't have to see me again. You're not going to have to hear it again. You're not going to have to confront this piece of yourself. Now, he waited till the moment when the children were sitting around the bed. He knew that that is the time when everyone's heart is open, attentive, ready to listen. And he used that time to give his children the criticism, knowing that they know that he's not going to see them again, he's not going to chase them again, he's not going to look at them again. This is the reason why he waited till then. So this answers the question, why did Moshe wait till his moment of passing? But the questions that are still standing very strongly is, where was Moshe at the time when he needed to take this situation in a moment of truth? Where was Moshe that then he was protecting them and securing them and praying for them, and suddenly Moshe here becomes full of criticism towards them? The mitzvah of criticizing someone is, if we know that someone is going to do an act of sin, we have an obligation to reprove him. We have an obligation to rebuke him. Now, like we said in the beginning of the class, it's not just about if you see someone going to do some offense, going to do some type of a sin. Even if someone hurt you, the Alter Rebbe brings a Shulchan Aruch, we have an obligation to speak our feelings, to let that person know that he hurt us. Moshe is holding his anguish against the Jewish people for 40 years. There is something going on here that causes Moshe to feel comfortable to express after 40 years his anguish. Rashi gives us another beautiful window into the inside of Moshe's thought process. It really opens up our hearts to our own learning of how proper criticism should be given. The verse, the 4th verse into this week's parsha, says that Moshe was waiting with the criticism until after the battle of Og and Sichon. Achrei Yakoisoi, Sichon Melachoi Moiri Ayoshev Becheshbo, until after the battle of Og. This was the last war that the Jewish people fought in the desert. It was the giant Og and the king Sichon, the king of the Amorites. Until after that battle, this is when Moshe began the series of lectures and he began the criticism. And here Rashi opens us up to another awareness about how proper criticism needs to be said. Says Rashi as follows. Moshe said, if I criticize them before entering the land, the Jewish people will say, what does he want from us? What good did this man do to us? He's only picking on us, and he's trying to find excuses why we're not going to enter the land. So the way the rebuke will be translated, it will be translated by the Jewish people that Moshe is trying to kind of like giving them a hard time and showing them how bad they are, so he doesn't have to bring them into the land of Israel. Says Rashi, this is why Moshe waited till after he finished fighting Og and Sichon, and he finished inheriting the beginning of the land of Israel. He started the inheritance of the land, conquering the land for them. Only then he took the liberty to say the words of rebuke. What happens over here? So the simple meaning of that is Moshe wanted to show them that he's actually doing something for them before he took the liberty to rebuke them. Now, this is very difficult to understand. There's nothing more hard than holding in a grudge against someone. I don't know if you carry any grudges or you had a grudge against someone, especially when you see a very precious person who is really destroying his life. Your heart really blows up. You want to say something. You want to save the person from his own demise. Moshe Rabbeinu is silent for 40 years. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't tell them what's going on in his heart. You know why? Moshe knows the secret of effective criticism. And the secret is, it's going to sound so simplistic, but so deep. Criticism can only be given from a place of deep love. You cannot criticize someone before you created a foundation or a premise where that criticism will land. The person that is being criticized has to be so convinced that you love him unconditionally, that you mean his best of the best, and your heart is clean from any bitterness, any anguish, any negativity. So when the criticism comes out, it comes from the deepest place of love, open love to the person. Only then the person might accept what you're saying. Moshe knows the 40 years down in the desert, the people were bitter. They were actually angry. They left Egypt with a promise that they're going to get to the promised land, and instead of that, they ended up in a giant desert. The changes were radical. Their lifestyle changed radically. And then suddenly, there is a decree to stay in the desert for 40 years, and all their families and ancestors are all going to die in the desert. Moshe knew there's no time in these 40 years to say one word of criticism to these people. He knew that he's never going to be able to convince them in those 40 years that he actually does love them, and whatever he says is actually for their betterment. So Moshe bites his lips for 40 years, holds his tongue, holds in the upsetness until after the 40-year journey comes to an end. And he shows them heroic victories against the kings of the land of Israel. So they can see the promised land across the border. And they could already imagine and picture themselves living in the beautiful villa that they're going to build themselves on the banks of the Mediterranean on the other side of the border or by the Jordan River. Only then Moshe knows, now I can talk. And this is what the Rashi tells us. There is no way criticism can be given before there is an energy of love and respect. Unless the person you're talking to knows that you love him and you respect him, and it's felt in every fiber of his being, then you know that whatever you're going to say will actually be taken to heart. There is a story that happened about 150 years ago. There was the Rebbe, Rashab, Reb Sholem Dov Ber. He was the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the one I am named after. Sholem Dov Ber, Berry, that's my name. He had an older brother that was much older than him. His name was Zalman Aaron. They were both children of the fourth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Maharash, Reb Shmuel. And as children of a Rebbe, they found themselves playing together games like Rebbe. One was a Rebbe, and the other one was the Rebbe's Chassid. So in the game, naturally, the older brother, who was 10 and a half years old, his name was Zalman Aaron, he played like he is the Rebbe. And his younger brother, who was only at that time 9 years old, Sholem Dov Ber, he played as a chassid. So Zalman Aaron went into his father's room, put on the big black hat, put on his father's coat, sat down on his father's chair, and he started chuckling on a book. And the younger brother, Sholem Dov Ber, knocks on the door, and he comes in to talk to the Rebbe. And he starts telling his brother, his older brother, who's playing Rebbe, he says that last Shabbos, he did something that was not really aligned with the laws of keeping Shabbos. And he's asking for a tikkun. A tikkun means he's asking that his brother should give him a certain direction how to fix the mistake that he did. This is what Chassid comes to the Rebbe. He comes to ask for a tikkun. His brother told him that his tikkun will be that he should start reviewing again the laws of Shabbos. And after he's going to review the laws of Shabbos, they will fix the mistake that he makes. A couple days later, the mother, who witnessed the whole game, turned to her younger son, Sholem Dov Ber, and she says, Beryl, are you doing what your brother told you? Are you studying the laws of Shabbos? He said, no, I don't do that. He said, wow, you're not listening to him? In the game, he was the Rebbe. You should have listened to him. He says, my brother is not a Rebbe. What do you mean he's not a Rebbe? He says, a Rebbe, when he hears that someone made a mistake, the first thing the Rebbe does, he sheds a tear. He shows that he's heartbroken together with you. And only then he offers advice. The first thing he did was he started offering me advice how to fix the problem. So I knew he's not a Rebbe, so I'm not listening to him. This behavior we spoke about last week in the class, this is the behavior that they saw by Aaron. What does Hillel tell us? That a person should be a disciple of Aaron, loves every creature, and brings them closer to the Torah. First, he administrates the love, and only then he educates them to the Torah. Where did Aaron learn that type of behavior? Where did Moshe know that he has to show the Jewish people good and favors before he criticizes them? Where did he know that? Who was his teacher? His teacher was God Almighty himself. Now, what did God do? Jewish people were in Egypt. First, he gave the 10 plagues. Then he took them out with great miraculous redemption. And he split the sea for them. And he gave them manna. and he gave them water, and he gave them clouds of glory. And only then he came and he gave them the Torah. God Almighty was the greatest teacher about how you demand from a person to change his ways, how you demand from people to behave better and to become better. It doesn't work by just showing up and say, you need to become a better person. You need to do this and this. It doesn't work. It actually does the opposite. The way it works is the way God Almighty was teaching Moshe and Aaron, and we all are learning. First, split the ocean for them. First, give them what they need. Show them how much you love them, how much you're willing to walk for them, how many miles you're willing to sweat just to administrate unconditional love towards them. And only after that, you can give them the Torah. This is exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu does. 40 years in the desert, if he would say anything, it would be counterproductive. It would do the opposite effect. Only after they received all the love, only after they saw that Moshe is fighting a war for them, only after they saw that they already are standing on the other side, only then Moshe came and he started criticizing them, reminding them how much they need to better their ways and follow Hashem's deeds and not repeat the mistakes of their forefathers. Now, we learned a couple of weeks ago about the mitzvah of the red afer. And in the mitzvah of the red afer, what happens is the same Kohen who prepares the red afer becomes impure. And the person who was impure becomes purified. And we talked about it at that time. How does it work exactly? If I am the one who purifies, why am I becoming impure? Isn't it fair? I am the Kohen. I am the one who purifies you. Why am I becoming impure? And we learned a very powerful teaching. And that was, it doesn't work that way. If you want to purify someone, you need to go down to the level of that person. You cannot fix a problem unless you see yourself part of the problem. And this is what true love is. True love is not I versus you. I am good. You are a problem in this house. True love means us. There's a problem happening between us. Something is wrong in our relationship that we need to pay attention to and that we need to wake up to, and we both have to do better. This is a voice of love. This is a voice of respect. This is a voice of someone who is willing to accept his own mistake and his own problem so he can fix someone else's problem. Divine criticism is given, and this is how divine purification happens. When the Kohen, the high priest, the holier man, allows himself to become contaminated for the well-being of someone else. Yes, I am investing myself in your purity. I am putting myself in your embetterment. It comes on my own expense. That's true love. This is why the Kohen is called a lover. Because only a Kohen who blesses the Jews with love, only someone who believes and lives a life of true love, only he can be in the space of understanding is, in order for someone else to get elevated, I need to lower my back so the person could put his feet on top of my shoulders. That's the way holy criticism is being done. There was a little, I'll share with you the story of the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe was once in the middle of taking in Hasidim for Yechidus. Hasidim would come in and talk about their problems, and the Rebbe would help them. And suddenly he stopped. And he closed himself up in his room for 3 days, and he was crying and praying, and no one knew what happened. And make a long story short, he came out after that and he said that someone walked in and he asked for help on a sin that he did. And he said the sin was so horrific. It was so horrific. What was the problem? He said, every time someone comes to talk about a problem that he did or he had, I always find that problem in me before I help that person. I need to walk in that person's shoes so I can fix them. He says, that person walked in and he shared with me something that he did. It was so horrific. It was so unconceivable, unacceptable. I could not find that in me. I couldn't find it in me. I couldn't walk in his shoes. I couldn't elevate him because I wasn't able to sympathize with him. So I realized that if that came to me, that means that this type of a problem is so deep in me that I don't even notice. It's maybe my blind spot. So for 3 days, the Rebbe cried and he prayed, so Hashem should show him where is the relationship between him and that sinner. I remember when I went to learn my first course in hypnotherapy, one of our teachers, a giant for himself, he said something he said this teaching he was sharing with us is not Jewish and he didn't learn Hasidus, but he said when a client sits in front of you, you need to see yourself in the life of the client. It's not, I am the therapist, I am okay, and the client is the one who needs help. See the story of the client. How is it my story of your life? He was trying to provoke in us students a sense of compassion. And he gave a very extreme example. He says, walks into you a person and he expresses to you his tendencies. He's an adult and he has a tendency and he has an urge to touch little children. Now, we know if this person is dangerous to society, if he says to you that he actually does that, then obviously you have to stop the session and call police and make sure you follow the law. But what happens if a person shows up and he just expresses his tendencies? He has this tendency. He's having urges to something that is criminal, despicable. Obviously, he doesn't act on it, but he's seeking help. Now, what is your reaction as a therapist? Now, you don't have those tendencies. You are repulsed by a person like this. You are, especially if you are a father of the children yourself, that scares you that a person like this is alive and free, maybe even in your neighborhood. How are you able as a therapist to treat a person like this with proper compassion? And he said something very powerful. He says, just take a moment and think to yourself, where am I like him? Where am I? What's the essence of touching little children? The essence of that is taking advantage on someone that is weak. Where are you taking advantage on someone that is weak? If you can find in yourself that kernel, that seed, then you can help him. It's not anymore about the gravity of that impulse. It's more about me and I and you are all in the same boat. We struggle. I struggle with taking advantage on people who are weak. You are struggling with wanting to take advantage of little children. Now, obviously, this is a call for great expansion of human consciousness and great awareness of to be in a place of love and finding pieces of other people in our own personality. That's the only way you could help someone. The only way the Kohen could help and support someone who is contaminated is by the Kohen himself allowing himself to become contaminated. Moshe Rabbeinu knows if I don't go down and dirty with them, I cannot rebuke them. They don't feel love towards me. I am God's man. I took them out of Egypt. I schlepped them through the desert. I didn't give them anything. I didn't give them a land. Yes, I gave them plenty. But the whole promised land was never given to them. Only after I fought the war, only after then Moshe Rabbeinu feels ready to finally administrate words of criticism through them. And here we come to the understanding is, first Moshe talks in riddles. First Moshe shows them how much respect he has towards them. And obviously, after he talks in riddles, the opening, then he goes into the details. Now, you know what the best way of criticism is? Is when you yourself starts behaving differently. When you yourself start behaving in a way that is not the usual way, you know what happens when you shine your light? Suddenly what happens is people around you start behaving differently. When you start using a gentle voice that is not usual, suddenly people around you are starting to use the most mysterious way that happens. When you start becoming more sensitive and more open and more, when you do your own work, suddenly people around you are getting touched as well. Now, we understand that from the story of Joseph and his brothers. Yosef is sent by his father to go and see how the brothers are doing. And Yosef knows that he's going to get killed. The angel tells him, when he encounters the angels tell him that the brothers are plotting to kill you. And Yosef goes anyways. Now Yosef knows that the sin of his brothers was that they have no respect to the father. And for that, he's not going to give them a lecture about respect. He's actually going to do something that will cost him for his life, just to fulfill the will of his father, to live by example. Now, you know the question is, why do we ask the 4 questions on Pesach? Why don't we ask 4 questions on Tisha B'Av? Saturday night is going to be Tisha B'Av. It's the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. We're going to fast for 24 hours. Hopefully Mashiach comes before that. Why don't we ask questions then? Only time we ask questions is when we sit around the table and we celebrate. Suddenly then we ask questions. And the answer is very powerful. When someone sits on the floor and is hungry and is fasting and is heartbroken and is devastated, that's not a time to ask questions. The time to ask questions is when someone feels good and someone has everything he needs and someone's needs are met and someone feels joy and glad and sits. This is the time to ask the questions. So in the summary of tonight's class, the question of tonight's class was how criticism should be given. And we said we're going to be practical. We're going to talk about criticism from a very, very practical place. How is it being done in a way that it has an effect and it actually elevates versus causes more wreckage, more problems, more issues? And the answer is pretty simple. The person you talk to has to feel and know in every fiber of his being that you love him unconditionally. The person has to know that you have the deepest respect towards him. And only then, on this premise, on this foundation, you could even attempt to criticize, to rebuke. I will just conclude with a story that will actually illustrate the practicality of that. The previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, was once, for medical reasons, he was in a hospital in Vienna. And every day they used to administer a certain shot for the issue they were suffering from. And the nurse used to come in and she used to wash her hands with alcohol. And then she used to go open the area where the shot had to be administered. And she washed that area with alcohol as well, sanitizing it. And then the nurse sanitized the needle. And after everything was sanitized, then she took the needle, poked it in for a second, took it back out, and put a bandage. And the Rebbe asked the nurse, what is all of this washing your hands, washing the needle, washing me? She explained to him about germs, that I can't administrate you a shot without making sure that there is no germs around me, or germs around the needle, or even germs around you. I'm going to crack your skin. I have to make sure everything is pure and clean from all sides. And the Rebbe listened to her, and the Rebbe says, this is a beautiful metaphor about administrating a poke from one person to another. And this is what criticism is. Criticism poking in onto someone else. Hurting, literally hurting someone else for the embetterment, for making him better, for making him healthier. In order to administrate a poke, in order to give someone a shot, in order to give someone a medicine that's going to hurt him, number one, the person who does it has to wash his hands and sanitize himself, meaning to say, pure your heart from any hate, any jealousy, any disrespect, any judgment. Sanitize and sanitize and sanitize. Because if you're going to give that shot without sanitizing yourself, you're actually going to give me germs and kill me. And then the Rebbe says the next level is what you are putting into my body has to be sanitized as well. Which choice of words are going to come out of your mouth when you're going to criticize me? How will I translate what you're saying? Sanitize your words, sanitize your tongue, make sure that whatever you're going to say will be taken in the literal sense, in the cleanest way possible. And here comes a very important one. Make sure that the person who is receiving is sanitized as well. Make sure to create an atmosphere that the person who is receiving it, his heart is pure, is ready to receive that shot, and it's not going to cause to become more infected or more angry or more upset or more repulsive. Make sure that he is ready. Prime him. Show him the love. Show him the respect. Sanitize the recipient. Now, once you are sanitized, once the needle is sanitized, once the recipient is sanitized, everything is in the right place. Now comes the main teaching. In and out. Don't keep on poking. Do your poke. Do what you have to do. Administrate the medicine. And then pull out right away. And back to love. Back to respect. Now, this is what we are learning here is in Moshe's behavior, in Moshe's approach of creating an environment. For 40 years, that environment is unavailable. The Jews are not ready. But only now, the last day of his life, after he conquered Sichon and Og, they see what this man is willing to do for them. Moshe knows he primed them. He prepared them. He is sanitized. The people are sanitized. And now what he's going to say will be accepted, welcomed, taken to heart, and become a book of teachings that for the rest of eternity of the Jewish people, they will follow the ways of these teachings. God Almighty should help us. We know that the temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. And the way it's going to be built is with baseless love. And this is exactly what we all have to attune to. The importance of choosing love, choosing in a form of mastery, mastering your own being to become an advocate. Yes, we need to criticize, we need to sometimes say a harsh word, but to really open our consciousness and to be in the awareness of the power of your words, of the power of what comes out of you, the sensitivity of the effect that it has on your spouse, or the effect that it has on your children. And really believe that with pure love and with true love and with baseless love, you're rebuilding the next temple. You're bringing Mashiach. There's no other way. God bless you all. A wonderful Shabbos. And hopefully Mashiach will come, all join together